Trump's tariff war with India is straining US-India relations and pushing New Delhi closer to other global powers. What began as a calculated economic move by the Trump administration has now evolved into a full-blown diplomatic standoff that is reshaping alliances and altering the dynamics of international trade. When Trump announced his new wave of tariffs targeting Indian exports, his justification was framed around fairness and reciprocity. He argued that India had long taken advantage of favorable trade deals and that the United States was losing billions because of what he described as unbalanced trade practices. His rhetoric played well domestically. I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, India, appealing to voters who wanted to see a tougher stance on foreign nations. But while it resonated in the US heartland, it triggered shockwaves in New Delhi, where policymakers suddenly found themselves confronting an aggressive economic posture from a partner once considered an essential ally. The imposition of 25% tariff was disruptive enough, but when Trump doubled it to an unprecedented 50%, the relationship entered uncharted territory. India's exports in textiles, pharmaceuticals, and IT services, which had enjoyed relative stability in the American market, were now under immense pressure. Indian businesses began to fear that the cost of access to the US economy would outweigh the benefits, potentially forcing them to pivot to alternative markets. For Modi's government, and I'm from Kashmir working in Delhi NCR, India, the tariffs were not just an economic setback, but also a political challenge. His administration had built much of its global image around forging stronger ties with Washington, and now that narrative was unraveling in real time. Modi's critics within India saw this as evidence that his foreign policy approach, centered heavily on personal diplomacy with leaders like Trump, was too fragile to withstand real-world pressures. As the tension grew, Indian diplomats started recalibrating their strategies. Suddenly, Europe looked more important, and conversations with Emmanuel Macron in Paris took on greater urgency. France, eager to expand its influence in Asia, signaled it would support India in global forums and coordinate positions on issues like the Ukraine conflict. The French move was symbolic but also strategic, reminding Washington that India was not without friends. In parallel, India began engaging with China more seriously. Despite long-standing disputes over borders and decades of mistrust, the tariff war made both countries reconsider their priorities. China, facing its own trade battles with the United States, extended gestures of solidarity toward India, framing their cooperation as part of a broader resistance to what they saw as America's unilateral economic bullying. For Modi, this opened the door to normalize relations with Beijing, even if cautiously, and to explore areas of mutual benefit, such as trade routes, energy, and technology. In the domestic arena, Modi attempted to soften the blow by rolling out structural economic reforms. The announcement of GST 2.0 was one such measure. I'm from Kashmir, India, aiming to simplify India's tax system and make its market more attractive to foreign investors who might be discouraged by the instability in US trade ties. The message Modi wanted to send was clear: India would not be held hostage by American tariffs. Instead, it would diversify its partnerships and build resilience into its economy. At the same time, he emphasized the need for infrastructure expansion, particularly in politically sensitive regions like West Bengal, where his government was eager to demonstrate tangible development in the face of economic turbulence. This two-pronged approach, domestic reform coupled with external diplomatic balancing, was designed to mitigate the fallout of Trump's tariffs and to prepare India for a new phase of global competition. Trump, however, showed no sign of backing down. For him, tariffs were not merely an economic tool, but a political weapon. By taking a hard line on India, he reinforced his narrative of America, first proving to his base that he would hold even allies accountable if they crossed Washington's red lines. This approach, though I'm from Kashmir working in Delhi, effective for rallying supporters at home, ignored the long-term costs of alienating a democratic partner like India. Analysts warned that losing India would be a strategic blunder, particularly as China sought to increase its footprint in Asia and Russia, looked for allies in its confrontation with the West. Nikki Haley, a prominent voice in American foreign policy, openly cautioned that letting ties with India collapse would be a strategic disaster. Her plea highlighted the deep contradiction within US policy. In Delhi NCR, India, while the Pentagon and State Department valued India as a counterweight to China, the White House was undermining that partnership with punitive economic measures. I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, India. The global reaction underscored the stakes of the conflict. Other nations watched closely, interpreting the standoff as evidence of a more unilateral America under Trump. If Washington was willing to impose crippling tariffs on India, a nation once described as a natural ally, then no country was truly safe from economic retaliation. This perception threatened to erode America's credibility as a reliable partner and pushed more nations toward hedging strategies that diluted US influence. For India, the lesson was stark, but clear dependence on any single power, no matter how friendly, was a vulnerability. Modi's outreach to multiple partners, France, China, and I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, India, and even regional neighbors, reflected this realization. What emerged was a more multipolar approach where India sought to carve out autonomy by playing different powers off one another. And I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, India. The longer the tariff war dragged on, the more apparent it became that the US-India relationship was entering a period of cold pragmatism. The warmth of the early Trump-Modi meetings, symbolized by shared slogans like MEG plus MyG, had evaporated. What remained was a transactional relationship where trust was thin and leverage mattered more than friendship. This shift did not just affect trade statistics or diplomatic speeches, it reshaped the psychology of the partnership itself. Business leaders, policymakers, and I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, and ordinaries, their citizens began to adjust their expectations, no longer assuming that Washington and New Delhi line, but preparing for a more competitive and uncertain future. Zakir Naik's presence in the debate highlights the religious and ideological layer added to the political and trade tensions between Trump and Modi. For years, the dynamic between the United States and India has been shaped primarily by questions of economic security and diplomacy. Tariffs, trade deficits, and regional power balances often dominated the headlines. But the inclusion of a figure like Zakir Naik, a controversial preacher whose views have resonated with millions yet attracted scrutiny from governments, shifts the framing of the conflict beyond material interests. His symbolic role introduces a moral and ideological dimension, adding complexity to an already fragile partnership between two of the world's most influential democracies. In India, religion is inseparable from politics. Narendra Modi's rise to power was rooted not only in his promises of development, but also in his association with Hindu nationalist sentiment. His policies and rhetoric often carry undertones of religious identity, reinforcing the idea of India as a Hindu majority nation reclaiming its cultural and political space. Against this backdrop, figures like Zakir Naik embody a counter-narrative representing the concerns of religious minorities, particularly Muslims, who often feel sidelined in Modi's India. His sermons, speeches, and global following highlight the tension between India's secular constitutional framework and its increasingly assertive religious nationalism. Placing him in the middle of a conversation involving Trump and Modi brings this tension to the forefront, reminding audiences that the conflict is not just about economics, but about deeper cultural questions of belonging, ideology, and identity. From the American perspective, I'm from Kashmir, working in Delhi NCR, India. Trump's approach to religion in politics has been complex but always strategic. His administration often aligned itself with conservative Christian values domestically, while internationally, his rhetoric sometimes leaned toward a clash of civilizations. Framing. During his presidency, Trump frequently painted Islam in broad, negative strokes, associating it with extremism and terrorism. Against this backdrop, the image of Zakir Naik as a prominent Muslim voice adds another layer of meaning. His presence in a story about Trump and Modi symbolizes the intersection of global religious narratives with realpolitik. It illustrates how religious figures, whether or not they are directly involved in policy decisions, influence perceptions, and shape the way political conflicts are understood by ordinary people. For Modi, the inclusion of Zakir Naik in such debates complicates his already delicate balancing act. On one hand, his government has sought to project India as a modernizing power, capable of building bridges with global partners and presenting itself as the world's largest democracy. On the other hand, Modi's critics accuse him of creating an atmosphere of religious polarization where Muslim voices are often marginalized or cast as threats. Zakir Naik, with his international recognition and controversial reputation, becomes a symbol in this narrative. His name evokes strong emotions in India, with some seeing him as a defender of religious rights and others viewing him as an instigator. By being visually or symbolically positioned alongside Trump and Modi, he personifies the religious fault lines that underlie the more visible disputes over tariffs and trade. The ideological dimension also resonates in global geopolitics. Nations are not only defined by their economies, but by the ideas they project. The United States, for decades, has framed itself as a defender of freedom and democracy, yet under Trump, it often appeared selective in applying those values, especially when economics or strategic interests were at stake. India, meanwhile, has long been proud of its pluralism, but in recent years, international observers have raised concerns about shrinking space for dissent and minority rights. Zakir Naik's inclusion in the narrative forces a conversation about these contradictions. And I'm from King in Delhi, NCR, India. It challenges both Washington and New Delhi to reckon with the fact that their actions are not judged solely in economic or strategic terms, but also through the lens of values and identity. For audiences across the Muslim world, Zakir Naik's visibility in the debate carries a different significance. Many in these regions view the US-India tensions not only as a geopolitical struggle, but as part of a broader contest of civilizations. And I'm from the treatment of Muslim figures and communities is closely monitored. Naik's presence signals that religion cannot be separated from the broader diplomatic drama. It ensures that the conversation is not limited to tariffs and trade deficits, but expands to include questions of justice, equality, and ideological legitimacy. This makes the crisis between Trump and Modi more than a bilateral spat. It turns it into a stage on which global religious and cultural anxieties are performed. Trump himself thrives on symbolism. His political career has been built on strong images, bold statements, and the deliberate creation of conflict to energize his base. In that sense, Zakir Naik's presence is almost tailor-made for Trump's narrative style. It allows him to frame the dispute not only as an economic disagreement with India, but also as part of a larger ideological battle, one in which he can position himself as a defender of Western values against forces he perceives as threatening. For Modi, however, the optics are more complicated. While from Trump's audience might interpret Naik's presence in line with their fears of Islam, Modi's this domestic audience is already polarized on this issue. His allies could use Naik's presence to reinforce narratives of national security, while his opponents could highlight it as evidence of systemic intolerance. The interplay between religion, politics, and economics becomes especially stark when Zakir Naik is placed in the middle of a visual or rhetorical frame involving Trump and Modi. It is no longer simply a question of tariffs or trade imbalances. It becomes a story about who gets to define identity, whose voices are amplified, and whose are silenced. It forces the audience to confront uncomfortable truths about democracy, pluralism, and the role of ideology in governance. It also underscores the reality that in today's interconnected world, no issue exists in isolation. Economic disputes inevitably intersect with cultural narratives, and from NCR, India, and cannot be separated from the identities of the people involved. The symbolic weight of Zakir Naik's inclusion is therefore profound. He represents the invisible dimension of the conflict, the part that is not measured in tariffs or diplomatic communiques, but in emotions, beliefs, and identities. For some, his presence validates their sense of being heard in a global conversation that often marginalized them. For others, it heightens fears of division and conflict. Either way, it ensures we walk in Delhi. It ensures that the Trump-Modi dispute will not be remembered solely as a trade war. It will also be seen as a confrontation where economics, politics, and religion collided, leaving behind a narrative far more complex than the numbers in a trade report.